All right, well, we'll go ahead and get started. Today is July 13th, and welcome to Starboard's Maximo Coffee Chat. This is kicking off our summer series with today's presentation, Maximo KPIs for your ROI. So joining us today is Pam Denny and Lonnie Trotter to share all their knowledge about how you can make the most of key performance indicators. Hi, Pam. Hi, Lonnie.
Hi, Alex.
Hi, Alex. So let's get started. Alex, if you could take us to the next slide, please. So Alex, again, thank you very much for kicking us off today. We are so excited for our upcoming Maximo Summer Chats. As Alex mentioned today, I'm joined by the amazing Lonnie, and we're going to talk about KPIs. And then in August, we'll be joined by IBM's Tom Saracen as he talks us through new features of Maximo 8 integrations, followed in September by Vinicius from IBM, who will lead us through new mobile inspection features. So Alex, if you could take us to the next slide, we are also super excited today to highlight that Starboard has recently celebrated its 14-year anniversary. So for over 14 years, Starboard has been an IBM Gold Level partner. We've partnered with all sorts of Maximo clients on implementations and upgrades, configurations, integrations, and so much more. And one of the key parts about Starboard is how focused we are on education. Educating our Maximo clients, educating the Maximo community on critical Maximo features and functionality. And that's why we have these webinars. Our webinar format today, as Alex mentioned, is 30 minutes long. We're planning about 20 minutes of a discussion between Lonnie and myself, and then we'll open it up for questions. We encourage you at any time to put your question in the chat, whether you have a question on KPIs, whether you have a comment on our webinar format or our webinar content, if you'd like us to see, if you'd like to see us present something else in the future. So please go ahead and use that chat at any time. Also, again, I'd like to highlight that I'm joined by the amazing Lonnie Trotter here. She is a senior functional analyst at Starboard Consulting. And although neither one of us are actually on the beach today, Lonnie, I think it was just about a year ago that we did a webinar together. Is that right?
That's right. That's right, Pam. And it is good to be with you again. Last summer, we did a service request work center webinar together, talking about the improvements that have been made and showing folks how they can configure the service requests work center with using ticket templates. So we always like to bring the new features and new power that IBM has deployed to the applications. We'd like to bring them out to the world to see. And that's kind of the cool thing about Maximo, right? I mean, IBM is constantly improving, and it's always fun to see what they brought out and then how it can meet the needs of our clients.
Right, exactly.
But at the same time, some of the things about Maximo are very core and they're very basic, and they continue to serve as well. Core functionality like KPIs. So that's kind of why we want to talk about those today. There have always been for decades now the need for a business to track things, right? To track their measurements, to measure their performance in some way. And every company kind of has a different view on those kinds of things. We like to narrow things down as far as best practices for our clients, especially if you're just getting started in this area, or if you're having trouble in managing these metrics with Maximo. We're going to talk about the three basics, right? So we have choose, create, and communicate. Those are the three basics about the best way to deploy and utilize the KPIs in Maximo. So what's neat here is that whether you're new to Maximo or whether you've been using, Maximo for 10 or 20 years, the basics are still the same. But before we start into the details of these best practices, let's do a quick poll. So before Alex starts the poll, we want everyone on the call to know that it's not our standard kind of poll. So please participate. It'll make the rest of the webinar a lot more fun if you participate. So, Alex, go ahead and bring up the poll.
In your chat box, you should see the poll. Being kicking off summer, we thought we would keep it a little fun, but it does relate back to the session. But we want to hear from you. What's your favorite flavor of ice cream? I know my coffee, buzz, beloved Ben & Jerry's isn't listed. If you want to add your favorite in the chat box, you can find your ice cream twin. But ooh, cookies and cream with a big lead on our poll right now.
That's incredible.
Yeah. Followed by, I think vanilla and butter pecan.
Wow. Now, can people vote more than once, Alex?
They can only vote once.
Oh, so you got to really carefully consider, huh?
Yeah. All right. I'm going to go ahead and end the poll. You're welcome to enter in the chat box, but cookies and cream for the big win, I think.
Wow.
That's very cool. That's a new kind of a recent flavor in my lifetime. It came out, after I was already a child, being, choosing ice cream. So it is one of the good ones.
That's
Go
awesome.
ahead, Pam.
Yeah, if you could bring up the next slide, Alex, we really appreciate that. So cookies and cream, what an amazing flavor. Well, actually, our food, I think it was Food Network or Food Channel said the #1 ice cream flavor in the United States is vanilla. And that came up pretty solid. I think that ranked about #2 or 3 from our poll. So Lonnie, what about you? What's your favorite ice cream flavor?
My favorite is mint chocolate chip. That's always my go-to if it's there. But sometimes, it's hard to decide what flavor. And when you go to ice cream shops that have menus that look like this, you're just, gazing and listening and trying to, visualize and taste in your mind, all these different flavors. And sometimes you just I want to try them all. But basically look at that caramel, tiramisu, spicy chai tea. Wow. And what do you think that mango fruit lolly tastes like? I'm just so intrigued. But when I see all the flavors, again, we're back to it's overwhelming. I'm not sure what I need to choose. But my grandkids are saying, Grammy, hurry up and decide. I want to give my order, So it's a thing, this ice cream choosing thing. But back to our topic, you can use the same ice cream choosing method, or the ability to choose, the fact that we need to be careful in our choices. You can use that as an analogy to KPIs. Businesses track many different things and they care about different things, and there are so many out there to choose from. So, anything from things like preventive versus reactive work. Those percentages are very important to some industries. Your percentage of rework on work orders, even down to the reliability kind of metrics that we all know. Mean time, between failures, mean time to repair, things that are industry-wide standards that that help us track our improvement. There's just so many of them out there, but what the important thing is to choose the ones that are going to help you make a difference, right? And choose only the ones that support your business objectives. So just because some other business that is tracking a certain kind of metric and that looks cool on a chart or something, and it sounds good to, to talk about, if your business isn't care about it, then just be careful, choose what's right for you. So back to our examples, if you're focusing on trying to reduce so much reactive work and to really get into the good reliability centered maintenance, find KPIs that measure that, or inventory metrics. If you're heavily working on improving your inventory things like stockouts and turnarounds and things like that might be good measures. Even data quality can be measured with a KPI. So these are all things, what are the business focused on? What are the things that they want to improve? Primarily things they want to improve are a good way to start measuring. You can't improve what you don't measure, right? So that's the choosing part of our best practices, Pam.
Yeah, Lonnie, that's excellent. And I can really envision this as I was recently at a client site, actually not so recently, I've lost track of time with COVID, but a few years ago I was at a client site and they showed me their start center. And I actually thought my eyes were going to pop out of my head because as I looked at the start center, they had the right and the left portlets and they were packed, literally packed full of KPIs. And all I could see was red and yellow and green and yellow and green and red and yellow and green all over the place. My eye didn't know where to look because it was overwhelmed with information. So even I love this ice cream board, but I'm overwhelmed. I don't know where to start. And that's the same thing, with a KPI. When people look and, as you say, measure so many different KPIs, it's very, very difficult to focus. So Alex, could you go to the next slide? And this brings us back to our friend vanilla ice cream. So when we look at vanilla and we think about creating KPIs, the analogy I'd like to use is with vanilla, we all know what to expect. And we can all imagine, that warm apple pie with vanilla ice cream or that warm apple crisp with vanilla ice cream. We all understand that. And that has the same meaning with KPIs. Using another example of a customer, in this case, I was working with a customer and they were measuring multiple different work management KPIs. But they weren't using Maximo to manage and to track those KPIs. They were actually extracting the data from Maximo, which many of us do, and that's great. But then a number of different users were defining and calculating the KPIs in Excel spreadsheets. So if you can imagine, you have 3 or 4 different people, right, deciding what work order backlog is. Everyone has their own different Excel calculation with potentially different, filters or values. And when you go into meetings and you talk about this, one user has a different value and a different understanding than another different user. And it just becomes so confusing. Have you seen that, Lonnie?
I certainly have. Having your KPIs clearly defined and standardized across the organization is key. Everyone needs to know what vanilla means. Everyone needs to know what reactive versus preventative means. What is the data set behind it? What are we using to output that data? We need to know what's behind the scenes, not just what's on the screen, right? So it needs to be understood across the organization, and having multiple data sources and then calculations and formulas, you always get the same answer twice. And that is very slippery slope for an organization. I've seen client KPIs, like we mentioned, preventive versus reactive, but in digging into the queries and into some of their calculations, some of them weren't correct. They were either the query was deficient, or they had filtered data out or put data in that wasn't appropriate. And then guess what? We use our measurements to make decisions, to look for ways of improving. And so there we go. We've made decisions based on deficient data. Yikes, that's not where we want to be, right? So the other piece of this when you're creating KPIs, clearly defining them and knowing exactly what they're telling you, is the naming of them. So, creating a KPI name that says work orders. What in the world does that KPI do? I mean, people are saying, well, what about work orders? What exactly am I seeing here? What story is this telling me? So it's very important for the creator and the designer of these KPIs to have basic understanding of being clearly named, clearly defined, so that the receiver of the information knows exactly what they're hearing. And of course, Maximo has many ways to create KPIs. From within the application, with a list query or anything you have on your screen, you can instantly create a KPI based on that data set or that query. Through KPI Manager, there's a special set of applications for KPIs in Maximo. KPI Manager can create them, and then there's the KPI template that can assist in helping design sort of a template for the KPI and to generate them as needed. But we're not going to try to get too far into the details of creating them. today we kind of just want to keep to the basics. And the point I want to stress is that whoever's creating that KPI, they have to know SQL. They've got to be able to query the data properly. And they need to understand the data. What is in the data, and what is the business looking for? Just like Pam's example of those multiple spreadsheets, I mean, different answer depending on who you're talking to. And that's just not good for the business decision process. So if they don't know the database, they could select wrong fields, join tables incorrectly, like I mentioned, filtering something out or putting data in that isn't appropriate. You just don't want to have that pitfall. So that's part of our simplicity of creation: clear, understandable, and correct. So that's kind of where this create best practices lands.
I love all those extra C words in there, Lonnie. Clear and correct. That's awesome. Yeah, excellent.
Yeah. So here we are, right? We've made the good choice of our good vanilla ice cream. We know exactly what vanilla is. We are going to create the story that KPI or metric is supposed to tell. And then guess what? We've got to let people know what it is and where to find it. And when they see it, what it means. So it's very important to build them and then communicate to the receivers of this data what it is they're going to, what does it point to? Once it points to something, what's the next step? The next step is, okay, we're not doing so good in this measurement, or I was expecting this to be higher or lower. So then it's the action that can lead you to, right? What can that person who's receiving the information do about it if it's not the number they expect, or they have a goal that they set for themselves and they're not reaching it, or they're over their goal? Maybe the expectation can be increased now. So it's this constant improvement, this constant measuring that leads you to getting better and better. So all of that kind of leads to why you choose, right, a small number to focus on, because too many on those start centers, like that Pam was saying, is very overwhelming and just not effective. You see all that. What are you going to do? What are you going to do? Well, you don't have anything leading you to an action. And then you create them simply and consistently, so everyone understands them. And then when people see that kind of thing, if they're clear and they're named well and they tell a good story, communication will flow. People will start using them and also telling others about them. So it really will impact the business by having, data to support your decisions in a way that you can rely on, I guess, is where the bottom line is.
Right. But with that, communication, Lonnie, sometimes it's really, really hard, right? How many of us open up Maximo every single day, and even though there may be 3 or 5 KPIs, they really don't draw our attention, right? It's like we see that button on the screen and we really don't pay attention to it, right? So it's a very continuous action. It's not like we communicate once and we're done. It's
right.
Communication continuously. Oh my goodness, another C word, right? Let's just keep throwing those C words in there, right? Because that's what it's all about, right? And that continuous communication is really hard, right? Because we're on to the next initiative, we're on to the next project. But we have to realize that, for this particular KPI, how our day-to-day business tasks are going to impact it. And I think that is so, so important. Yeah.
Yes. Every day we should be communicating about KPIs. In other words, it's just part of our everyday business language.
Yeah.
And it should be always, as you mentioned, a living thing. If the metric's not telling us what we need, or you are needing to adjust, the expectations of it, or you've introduced new pieces of data that could help tell the story better, you could always then not constantly, like every day, but on a regular basis, review and say, is this still doing what we want doing what it was intended to do for us and meeting our objectives, and then adjust it as needed. And of course, then recommunicate. Absolutely.
That's excellent, Lonnie. So one of the questions I have for you is do you have a particular favorite KPI that you always see implemented at client sites, or that you really encourage folks to use?
There are some that you see a lot, right? I would say I've already mentioned, several times that whole comparison between how much preventive work you're doing versus reactive, because the whole idea is to get ahead of that maintenance curve, right? Not to have failures that you have to go take care of, but to maintain the equipment or whatever you're maintaining so that it doesn't fail. But one of the companions to that metric that I like is I like the percentage of completed PM work where a corrective work order was initiated within 30 days after the PM. So that's telling us, okay, we did our regular maintenance, but within 30 days of that being completed, we had a failure of some kind. So it kind of is one of those continuous improvements. Do we need to go back to our PM and look at the job plan on that and our maintenance practices during that particular maintenance window? Does that need to be enhanced or more frequently applied? Because if we're doing corrective shortly after a maintained thing, that there's just something there we need to look at. So it's a very good indicator. So that's one of my favorites.
That's awesome. If anyone on the call wants to put in their favorite KPI in the chat, I see Conrad put in his favorite ice cream flavor with Girl Scout Thin Mints, which just sounds delightful right now, actually. That sounds really good. I know some of my favorite KPIs are around data quality. I think data quality really is so critical, and you need that foundation of data, making sure your data is accurate, it's consistent, so you can develop really good KPIs from that, because with inconsistent, incomplete data, really it's hard to develop or to even get that baseline, how your performance is today, yet alone where you want to be tomorrow.
Absolutely. And one of the popular ones in that regard are things like failure reporting.
Yes.
Right. So analyzing all the work orders that do or don't have, problem, cause, remedy, or even at least problem and cause documented, that shows you that, well, you're not really can improve the failures if you don't know what's failing, right? Or so that's a good one I've seen is lack of failure reporting. Also just data quality in general. So scanning your assets and seeing how many of the asset specifications are populated, or certain asset specification values. If they're empty, then you could get that metric of, a certain percentage of your assets is lacking full data. So I've seen that too.
Yeah, and work orders closed with no actuals, right? No actual, labor, materials, tools. And that data is so priceless, right? Once you lose it, once you don't capture it, you've just lost this amazing opportunity.
Yes.
Yeah. So it looks like Mark is saying on-time delivery is important to him. On-time delivery of, I'm assuming, materials, right? POs.
Maybe materials, right? So So the time between, the request for materials and the issuing of the materials, that would be a great metric to look at for inventory management and for the warehousing topics as well.
Yeah. Yeah, we see a lot of that with inventory turns, right? Those type of metrics really, really important. Great.
So Pam and Lonnie, this is Alex. We had a great question submitted in advance of the webinar from one of our registrants, and I thought it was a great question. They wanted to know if you can share some of your KPI favorites or strategies that really meet the different levels within an organization, from management leadership to supervisors to field staff. What are some of those key performance indicators at those different levels that you would recommend measuring?
Right. So, there's no stock answer to that, right? Because every business and every executive even of every business has their eye on something different. Or they are working toward a goal for their business. So what's important about that question is that you know what it is. Interviewing the executive leadership of an organization and saying, what is it that's meaningful to you? What is it you want to know about not only what's happening, but what do you want to improve? What are your goals in these areas? Because once you know what the executive's goals are, and the things that they kind of have their thumb on, their thumb on their heartbeat of, then let's get that data out, and let's let you see what you think what it is compared to what maybe you think it is. So that's important. But you're right. Every level has their own interest, from the workforce level or the field level. They want to see, how many work orders did I complete last month? How long did it take? How many hours were spent on certain job plans? I mean, there's that, because you want to see like how to plan and schedule based on some of that data. Pam, what are you thinking of that at the different levels?
So one of the ones that I hear a lot about is wrench time. How much time are my workers actually working? If I just had a simple 8-hour day, are they actually working, 7.5 hours? You take out breaks, you take out lunch and travel time,
Right.
You take out prep time, the prep time to stop by the storeroom for an unexpected material, right, which impacts your planning. So that whole wrench time, I think, applies to all levels of the organization. But it just lends itself to such more in-depth and great topics and discussions, and how that wrench time is actually being measured. Is the technician actually starting the job when he's actually working on it, or does he start the job in his truck, right? And then he walks from his truck to the job, he picks up his material, etc. So there's so many different variables that lead to these amazing, interesting discussions. But like you said, Lonnie, there's no one KPI solution for everybody. It really takes a lot of discussion, and it really takes a match of what the organization's objectives really are.
Yeah, and the message there is that, again, grabbing a bunch of KPIs from a fellow, a colleague in your industry is just the first step, right? Just as examples, yeah, you can use those as examples, but they may not completely apply to what you're trying to accomplish. But it would have the nuts and bolts to it, but you're going to want to make it be your own, that's meaningful for your organization. That's so true. That goes back to the choosing.
Exactly.
Great tips to ask the right questions to help get to those KPIs that matter.
Yes.
I think I heard you mention a KPI template application. I'm not sure I've heard of that. Can you expand on that a little bit more?
Well, it's a very cool application. I will say that it's not for the faint of heart, but I've used it. I can use it. I've done it. And once you learn it and it clicks, it's very, very powerful. So what this is for is, let's say that you have a KPI that's important to the whole organization. Let's just go back to preventive versus reactive or corrective. So you create a KPI that's very plain vanilla, all work orders, all work orders, and you measure that, right? The by work type, preventive versus corrective. Let's just say you do that. But then you want that KPI to be published for different work groups. So like the electric work group or the water work group is, let's say you have a municipality or a university or someone like that, and the different work groups want to look at just their own stuff. So you create the one KPI that's very general, that gives you a big data set when you return the data. Then you add variables. You add variables to the KPI that say that you can put in a variable for the work group. So once you set your work groups up, you set those variables in, and then Maximo in the KPI template application generates the KPIs for all those work groups in one click. So you don't have to create a KPI for all 8 work groups. You create one, put the variable in, boom, you've got KPIs for all the work groups, and then you can publish those on the Start Centers as needed. So it's like a proliferation or a generation of multiple KPIs based on one basic metric. Does that make sense?
Yeah, huge time saver, right?
Yes. And a mistake saver. Saver.
Exactly.
Mistake saver. I love that. Well, I see that we are right at time. I want to thank our audience for joining us this afternoon. Good news, you are already registered for the summer series, so we look forward to seeing you back on August 10th for Maximo 8 integrations and September 14th for mobile inspections. Thank you so much, Pam and Lonnie. Great presentation, great tips on choosing, creating, and communicating KPIs that matter.
Thank you, Alex.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, everybody, for coming. See you soon. Have a great summer.
Bye.
Bye.